This is section 2, the reading comprehension section of the U.S. History, Civil Rights, and Vietnam exam. This comes from Thomas Nelson Moe, who was a captain in the United States Air Force, and he was shot down on January 16, 1968. I was hiding under a log, doing my best to masquerade as North Vietnam terrain. I'd pulled branches on top of me, smeared mud on my face, and arranged leaves and other foliage to stick out of my clothes. I was 20 miles behind enemy lines, having parachuted out of my F-4C fighter aircraft when a weapon malfunction blew it, along with my wingman, to bits. So far, my terrain act was working. A group of North Vietnamese soldiers had passed, unaware of my presence, within 6 feet of me. I was eventually betrayed by a small hole in my camouflage through which I poked my radio antenna. Within seconds, a zillion rifles were pointed straight at my head. Thus began a month-long, 100-mile journey to the Hanoi Hilton to begin my 5 years as a prisoner of war, where I would get to know pain on a personal basis. What I was not prepared for were the effects of solitary confinement. For the first 9 months of my captivity, and sporadically later, I didn't see, hear, or talk to another American. Although physical pain was inflicted on me deliberately and effectively, I would discover what an incredible burden mental pain would add to my suffering. How a dark fog slowly could creep over my consciousness, trying to rob me of my remaining power of reasoning. I saw that the mind could convince life itself to slip away through the beckoning black hole that pain created. I learned how vital it was to keep the mind as sharp as possible. The body is first to give up. You cannot keep yourself from passing out, throwing up, or screaming. I discovered that the more the body convulsed involuntarily, the more I could observe it as though it belonged to someone else. I found I could intellectualize pain, which allowed me to take a quantum leap in my tolerance of it. Sometimes, though, the problem was staying in touch with reality enough to keep alive. Detaching oneself too much has a narcotic effect that insidiously invades one's reason and dulls normal danger signals. This subtle process is probably the way nature helps us die without being all tensed up. We perspired so much our skin became waterlogged, looking like pale cheese, a crumbling coat of slimy flesh, often festering with rash and fungus. Horribly dehydrated, we got only 2 little teapots of putrid water a day, and we used some of it to dampen our faces and wash off the crumbling skin. On top of this, mosquitoes were thick, their wings creating a constant chorus, and the room stank from the waste bucket. Rat droppings seasoned the food along with razor blades, glass, stones, and pieces of wire. Actually, some of this unexpected booty came in handy. After about a year of captivity, when, oddly, I was getting accustomed to the harshness, my journey took me down an even darker path. The situation developed slowly. First, I was told I might win an early release if I would cooperate and meet with some visiting delegations, anti-war groups or radical Hollywood personalities, and tell them I had been treated well. I refused these special favors, and at any rate would not participate in their propaganda. When they kept pressuring me, I went on a hunger strike. An emaciated prisoner would not make good propaganda, I reasoned. This got me off the go-home early list. Things started with long sessions of standing immobile around the clock. Next, I was put on my knees for 3, 4, 6 hours at a time. This went on for days. It was the first phase, sort of a limbering up session to wear me out, and I took the edge off my powers of reasoning. Then I was told to write a war crimes confession, saying I was sorry I'd participated in the war. When I refused, I got to serve as a stress reliever for about 20 guards. Each took his turn beating me to a pulp. They pounded me for 6 or 8 hours. By then I was getting pretty shaky. Then they got serious. I was introduced to a bowl of water, some filthy rags, and a steel rod. The guards stuffed a rag in my mouth with the rod. Then, after putting another rag over my face, they slowly poured the water on it until all I was breathing was water vapor. I could feel my lungs going tight with fluid and felt like I was drowning. I thrashed in panic as darkness took over. As I passed out, thinking I was dying, I remember thanking God that we had made a stand against this kind of society. At dawn, two Vietnamese officers casually strolled in. I told them they might kill me, but I still wasn't interested in their propaganda. They laughed and calmly said, "It's easy to die, but hard to live, and we'll show you just how hard it is to live." Sometime the next day, the guards untied me, and I sprawled on the bloody floor. Red fluid oozed out of every opening in my body. I had no strength to sit or stand. I just sort of unrolled. In spite of my sorry state, I did not want to look undignified, so I tried to get up. I managed to crawl to a corner, sit leaning against the wall, trying desperately to gather my thoughts. Then the beating stopped, just like that. Some weeks had gone by, and perhaps they had other business. Maybe they figured I might not make it. Although they had murdered prisoners, most of my colleagues who died were accidentally tortured to death. The North Vietnamese knew they could not win the war militarily, but they might succeed if they gained world sympathy. It would be difficult for them to look good if too many POWs died in captivity. But I came pretty close, as did many of my mates. As I grew more and more weary, I had to cope with one of the most corrosive components of the human spirit: hate. Hate is a terrible distraction, a horribly destructive human enterprise. Hate invades the consciousness when the mind's reasoning power fades. Hate is a way we assign blame for our plight when our faith weakens or our resolve becomes clouded. Pain intensifies hate, making us want to strike out at something. I stumbled into this blackness, and with vivid flashes of bitterness, I cursed everything that I had held sacred. I bathed in self-pity and resolved all my sufferings with the most wicked solutions. Although I drew some strength from hate, I finally realized I was drawing it from the devil. I journeyed into the lowest point in my life, and then I was truly exhausted. Maybe there is something to that old saying about pain is purifying, but I would not prescribe the treatment. Thomas Mo was captured in North Vietnam in January of 1968 and was released in 1973. 2 years later, he earned a master's degree from Notre Dame, where he eventually served as professor of aerospace studies and commander of the Air Force ROTC program. He retired from the Air Force in the fall of 1995.